DawgNation? Welcome in. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Mike Griffith here to put a bow on our big, shiny combine. Yesterday, your boy Arian Smith didn't even come close to breaking the record as expected. What did you make of that?
Well, you want the glass half full version of that? The glass half
Sure.
full version is that Arian Smith with his 4.36 and Dominic Lovett with his 4.41 was the fastest Georgia duo ever at the NFL Combine. There hasn't been one NFL Combine that had two receivers run that fast in one grouping ever before. Now, as far as Arian not breaking the 4.21, this is a guy and he's left that track background behind. We know that at one point when he was training for track, he ran a 10.10 and a 10.05 wind aided 100. But that was 3 years ago. How many surgeries, how many injuries, how many football games, how many bumps? This is a guy that had over 800 yards receiving. And I think sometimes because Arian had a couple of mistimed drops, we forget about the plays that he did make. We forget about the fact, Kaylee, that he was a gunner on special teams, that he did block effectively, something that Anthony Evans didn't do with the game in the clutch against Notre Dame. I hope Georgia fans remember Arian Smith as a humble kid who got better and better and better and then turned into more than just a deep threat. And while I am a little sad that he doesn't leave with an NFL Combine record, I will say that he showed up and left as a true football player, not just a track guy.
Yeah, here we are talking about him not breaking the record, but he still clocks in at a 4.36, which was the fifth best of all receivers that participated yesterday. But I guess where my mind goes is, where does this leave things for Arian? Is he still somebody that can get drafted, or because he wasn't able to perform like we expected him to, is it going to be one of those situations like a Kendall Milton or Dejon Edwards last year where you might not get drafted and just get picked up by another team?
Well, let me just add one more thing to that before we close the chapter on Arian in the 40.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we've kept a history of all the Georgia players at the NFL Combine. And so the fastest 40 time ever by a Georgia player, Stokes 4.25 COVID year. McCole Hardman will go down as the fastest receiver. He ran a 4.33. After Arian at 4.36, you got 4.41. Let's not let that story slide. Let's circle back to that, Kaylee. But Isaiah McKenzie, 4.42. Malcolm Mitchell, 4.45. George Pickens, 4.47. Tavares King, 4.47. AJ Green, 4.48. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say, well, Arian Smith's such a disappointment. He was still incredibly fast. And there were 10 receivers that ran a sub 4.4 yesterday in Indy. As to where it leaves Arian, I think it's borderline. It only takes one team to like you. He does play special teams. I could see him being a late round pick or a free agent. And I would say the same for Dom. Dominic Lovett running that 4.41. I was really impressed. That was much faster than I thought he was going to run. I thought he was more of a 4.5 possession guy. We know he's tough. We know he's physical. But that 4.41 is nothing to sneeze at when you consider Zamir White was a 4.40 guy and James Cook was a 4.42 guy.
Yeah, so what I'm hoping is, based on what Arian and Dominic Lovett were able to show yesterday, I hope that NFL coaches see what Kirby's been seeing in them all along, which is the potential. If you can see just enough with their measurements and their runtime, they've got the potential to actually be able to do something of quality at the next level. So I'm hoping that NFL teams saw that. But Dominic Lovett was somebody that impressed me all week long, not even just from the results yesterday, but in getting the chance to talk to him. I wish that we could have seen him as a Bulldog for just one more year.
Yeah, I liked how engaging he was. We never really got to see that personality come out. A lot of times when these guys get to the combine, you see another side of them, and you start to understand why they're leaders and how they're leaders. Because let's face it, when they go before the media in Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall, it's all about singing the company line. And a lot of times those personalities don't come out because they don't want to be a distraction, or because they want to talk about team first, or because they want to be careful not to say the right thing. So it was refreshing to see what Dom Lovett was all about. And we could really understand, I think, for the first time, why Kirby loved this guy. why he was such a good leader. Same with Arian Smith. You know, a lot of times people watching the games, they don't get a chance to see this kid after the game, and he's such a humble kid. These are good people that Kirby Smart's recruited, and I think NFL teams gives them a chance. The fact that they played in a program like this, where the bar is set so high, where the practices are so difficult, it's just a matter of if they can see these guys fitting in. And again, these are guys, Kaylee, that over the last 2 years, and this is a statistic that probably won't mean much to many people, but it should. They only gave up 23 punt return yards over the last 2 seasons. And you say, well, that's not a big deal. And I say, well, that kickoff return for a touchdown against Notre Dame sure was. So it's not a big deal till it's happened. But those are 2 guys that really got it done as gunners. And that does add value for NFL teams when they're considering who they might use that last pick on in the 7th round, or perhaps what free agents they pursue.
So now let's talk about Trevor Etienne. Did not measure super well, only came in at 5'8 3/4, 198 pounds, but was in the top 10 for all running back times. There were quite a few running backs that didn't participate in the 40-yard dash yesterday. I thought Trevor used that to his benefit, and we got the chance to hear him talk about the relationship with his brother and how different they were all week. But because of that relationship that he has with his brother, I think he has a really good understanding of what has to happen, what needed to be said in those behind the scenes interviews, what needed to be addressed, and all the things that he needed to do to bump himself up, because we've said it all week, but this was a way deeper running back class than we thought. And so for him to go out and to be able to have that good 40 time, I think that helped him tremendously.
Yeah, it helps a lot. You know, the medical is going to be big on Trevor. He got beat up a little bit this year. The durability is going to be something the teams are going to consider. I think Trevor's ability to catch the ball is really important. I think his return abilities are really important. He's a versatile athlete. I understand why he wanted to go pro. It's just for him simply wanting to go to the next chapter, not a matter of money. Obviously, the family has money. His brother has a big contract. It was just Trevor being ready to turn the page, and he may not go on day 2. He may be a 3rd-round pick, perhaps, Kaylee. But I do think he'll be drafted. I do think he'll be a guy that'll be probably a number 2 or a number 3 running back. You know, Kenny McIntosh is a guy now, for example, that was drafted late, that had to play, you know, in a really deep backfield in Seattle. And Kenny, towards the end of last year, just now getting a chance to show his wares. I could kind of see that for Trevor Etienne. Go to a team, maybe like Tampa Bay, maybe like Miami. You're not the 1, you're not the 2, you're the 3rd down back, you're the special teams guy. And eventually, as you get stronger and get into those NFL programs, you work your way into it. So I like Etienne. I like his attitude. I like what he says about living a legacy instead of leaving a legacy. Thought he represented himself really well. And of course, that portended into the offensive line interviews yesterday. And excuse my voice here. This is my Indianapolis voice. I don't know what it is about the city, but every year I get sick here. I don't understand it. I think it may be the change in climate. Maybe it's being in a room with 5,000 people.
Perhaps.
Maybe that's just a wild thought.
So yesterday you got the chance to hear from the 4 offensive linemen that will compete today, starting at 1:00. Jared Wilson, Tate Ratledge, Dylan Fairchild, Xavier Truss. What were some of the things that stood out to you about what those guys had to say?
Well, I think the most pertinent thing that Georgia fans should take away is those players all said, hey, Stacey Searles is a good football coach. And I think it was Xavier Truss that said he lights a fire under your ass. And he can be your friend and he can be a mentor off the field. But on the field, Coach Searles gets these guys fired up. And they said, look, the issues that the offensive line had weren't Stacey Searles. It was a lack of execution. You know, Trevor Etienne said, hey, the running game, I'll point to myself. My eyes weren't good early. These Georgia players are accountable.
Yes.
And I know sometimes fans like to think that, well, if you change coaches, it just – Todd Monken wasn't in Stetson Bennett's second year than he was the first. Stetson Bennett became a better quarterback, and offense got designed around him. There's only so much a coach can do. And the reality of it is this Georgia football team in 2024, yes, they battled through adversity, and they showed great resiliency. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think they had as good of an offseason leading into the season as they needed to have. I think one of the unintentional consequences of NIL is there's more distractions and things that take these guys away from some of the workouts and time that they would be putting in. I'm not being critical. I'm just being real. I don't think the team had as good of an offseason going into last year. And I would point the finger at Carson Beck, not getting as connected with the receivers as he needed. We asked Tate Ratledge, and he said, listen, Carson's a good guy. He'll bounce back in Miami. He didn't have a great year. I like that he said that the offensive line they were accountable for that. And I think that's big that they were willing to say that. But I think it's much more difficult now with NIL and a lot of the distractions that are out there. They don't have these guys outside those 20 hours in season, and there's only so much time they have in the off season. It's going to get more and more challenging for all coaching staffs, but particularly at places that have a lot of NIL deals and money in place.
Yeah, we heard varying points on that this week, and you have to read between the lines with certain questions. And one of the things that stood out to me is when we were talking to Arian, and we were joking around, asked him, do you have a fast car? He's like, well, I just got a new car this year. I was driving an '05 Toyota for a long time. I like to keep it classy. It's those little tiny things that you can start putting the pieces together, that maybe there wasn't that respect there between Beck and the guys around him. But I will say, to your point, accountability this week was something that really, it shouldn't surprise me about the group of guys that Kirby's put out here. But once you get to the combine, we see it more often, is that these guys can let loose, say the things that they want to say. They don't technically have that same allegiance that they do when they're a part of the program, but still, even in those tough questions, asking about what happened with the slow starts and what happened on this play when you did this, they never pointed the finger at anybody else other than themselves. And we heard Trevor Etienne say at Georgia, the standard is the standard, and seeing all those guys take accountability for all the things that happened this season, that right there showed me what the standard was at Georgia. You know what? I'm going to go into this. I'm going to do what I'm told. But at the same time, I'm not going to point the finger and blame someone else. When at the combine, you can do that. You can say whatever you want. If you want to put the blame on someone else, you can. But they all took accountability for all the mess ups this year. And I think that's something that Georgia's doing right, is the fact that all these guys can look at themselves and say, hey, you know what? It wasn't Coach Bobo. It wasn't Coach Searles. It was me.
And let's just give ourselves a reality check here, okay? There's 15 other SEC programs that would like to call themselves SEC champions today. Georgia won the SEC championship, and there has been a noticeable mood in the Georgia fan base because the team didn't play well against Notre Dame in the playoff. But the reality of the situation is that Georgia had an incredible journey, showed great resiliency, came from behind in many games, and won the SEC. So when we look around the league and we measure what Georgia accomplished compared to the other teams, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Georgia had the best season and that their players should be lauded in spite of drop passes, in spite of what we consider subpar offensive line play, because that standard is set so high. We've got to be careful not to get carried away and not to appreciate what Kirby Smart and his staff accomplished. And taking it one step further, there's not much good that we can say about the Sugar Bowl this year on many fronts. It was an outlier game. There was a tragic terrorist attack that caused a delay. There was a tragedy in Coach Smart's family with his father. There were freakish turnovers inside the 10-yard line on a fumble. At the end of the first half, the first kickoff return in 6 years for a touchdown against Georgia. These are freak things. It does happen. We're not used to it happening to Georgia. We've got spoiled with 7 straight season-ending bowl wins. That's crazy, going back to 2018. That's not reality. So Georgia got dealt a little dose of reality, We didn't get the happy ending that maybe everybody thought they deserved or should get. But the fact of the matter is, there's 132 other programs out there trying to win championships every year, and they've got really good teams. And maybe they don't suffer the injuries or the suspensions or have to play the schedule that Georgia played. Tate Ratledge did say that it's Kirby Smart that's told the team it's harder to win the SEC championship than the national title. We've been going off Ty England Dawkins saying it. It's the head ball coach saying it. I don't know if Kirby will say that publicly. We'll probably ask him now on Pro Day. He may not answer. We'll probably ask him that. But last year it sure was tougher to win. I mean, let's face it. Ohio State finished fourth in the Big Ten. Fourth in the Big Ten.
I think about that a lot. I think about that a lot.
Crazy. And they got 16. They had 16 guys at the combine. Georgia and Texas had 14.
Yeah. So all right, let's wrap up on combine. We'll shift our attentions to Pro Day, which is going to take place March 12th. Of course, DawgNation will be there. You can tune into all of our platforms to see what's going on that day. And the guys that we didn't see participate in drills, Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, they will take place in All Things Pro Day. And for the guys that didn't run a 40, they will also do that there. But the big news that's going to be coming out of Pro Day is going to be those guys that didn't make the combine. Everybody's going to want to know, hey, what's Dan Jackson doing? Or even a guy like Chaz Chambliss, who I believe it was Arian that said he was the toughest guy on that team. So there's going to be a lot of talk about Dan Jackson, and I'm so invested to see where he ends up getting drafted, because I would put my hypothetical life savings on it that he will, despite not getting invited to the combine.
Well, I think we all love Dirty Dan, and we all love his story and what he was able to accomplish. And we do think it's curious that he wasn't here. But you're right, Chaz Chambliss and Benjamin Urasic, two other guys that played some postseason All-Star games. They're going to get a look. They're going to end up on rosters. It's going to be big for them. I'll be curious to see how much Michael and Jalen do. I mean, I think they're both locked in as top 15 picks, but, the NFL is going to want to see them run. And, we were told by Jim Nagy, who, by the way, is no longer going to run the Senior Bowl. I don't know if you saw that news, Kaylee, but Jim is going to be the Oklahoma general manager. This is a new job. This is a new position. Of course, Jim interviewed for the New York Jets general manager job, and he's been a great friend to DawgNation. I know a lot of these people watching know that we've had a lot of exclusive interviews with Jim Nagy, the former scout with the Seahawks and the Patriots and the Packers in his 4 Super Bowl rings, and he's given us straight information. I'm going to miss Jim a lot. But Jim told us Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall is a tenth of a second slower than the combine turf. Now, I don't know what that's going to factor into on Jalen Walker's draft stock or Michael Williams. I don't think their 40-yard dash is why you're picking them. It's one more metric. We'll look at their broad jump and their long jump. I'm sure we'll see the explosion. I'm sure they'll do fine. But you turn the tape on with those two cats.
Well, like I said, that takes place March 12th. DawgNation will be there. If you haven't had a chance to watch our stuff from the combine this week, you can do that by going to our DawgNation YouTube page. See all those player interviews that we were talking about, especially from some of the more colorful guys like the Warren Brinsons and Dom Lovetts. Highly encourage you to go back and watch those. But as we're sitting here right now, you guys can tune into the NFL Network today at 1 o'clock to see the offensive line group work out, the last group this week. Mike, it has been an absolute pleasure to be in Indianapolis, Indiana with you all week. We hope you get to feeling better. I know that Indianapolis area, it does something to you. So hope you get better in DawgNation. Thank you so much for being with us all week long. Again, go check out that DawgNation YouTube page and make sure to join us on all social channels March 12th for UGA Pro Day.
Yeah, and let me say this for the people watching. When you're watching those videos, just remember it was Kaylee behind the camera. She worked extremely hard as well. I know you see her on here doing the videos and cutting up and having fun. She's driving 9 hours to Indianapolis and carrying that camera equipment around. So a lot of respect to you, Kaylee. You do a great job. This is one of the more challenging events, I think, for any journalist, and you knocked it out of the park as well. Enjoyed working with you this week.
Thank you. And so like Mike said, I'm behind the camera all week. So, sometimes my hands do shake. I'm not perfect. When you're holding that thing, you got to do the best you can. So just remember that. So thanks for pointing that out, Mike. DawgNation, thank you for being with us all week long. And again, we will see you all this week, DawgNation Daily on the Beat with Mike and Cody, myself and Jeff before the hedges, and myself and Connor and DawgNation at large, and UGA Pro Day, March 12th.